Usually when we talk about being on a sinking ship in the middle of the ocean, and the alarm bells suddenly start ringing, there's a very specific expectation of how people are going to react.
Right. You expect a total scramble. The crew is trying to fix the engine. Passengers are grabbing buckets to patch the hull, that kind of thing.
Exactly. I mean, it requires a collective effort to survive. There's panic, sure, but it's channeled into a shared purpose.
Yeah, everyone agrees that the main goal is to keep the ship from going down.
But imagine if instead of doing that, everyone just stops, looks at each other, shrugs, and then quietly retreats to their own private cabins to start aggressively bedazzling their own personal life vests.
Wow. Yeah,
Well,
just totally abandoning the ship itself.
Right. And that instinct to obsess over self-improvement and aesthetics while the world outside is seemingly collapsing, well, it isn't a new phenomenon.
Not at all.
In fact, Christopher Lasch diagnosed this exact psychological retreat way back in 1979 in his book, The Culture of Narcissism, American Life in an Age of Diminishing Expectations.
And it is astonishingly prophetic to read today.
It really is. So today we are taking a deep dive into how an era of profound political dread birthed a culture completely obsessed with therapy, self-preservation, and fame. And we really want to decode what this means for you, the listener, as you navigate today's world.
Yeah, because we're not just looking at surface-level selfishness here. We are exploring a fundamental restructuring of the modern personality, both culturally and, well, clinically.
So to unpack that, we have
Yeah.
to kind of set the scene, right? Because to understand that shift, you have to look at the atmosphere of the late 1970s.
The underlying driver there is what Lasch calls the sense of an ending.
And the dread of that era was just palpable. I mean, you had the very real fear of nuclear annihilation,
Right, and ecological disaster was entering the mainstream consciousness.
plus deep economic stagnation. There was this pervasive feeling across society that the future was essentially canceled.
Which fundamentally alters a human being's relationship with time, because historically, people have lived as a link in a chain.
Like historical continuity.
Exactly. You continue the traditions of your ancestors, and you sacrifice to build a world for your descendants. But when that continuity is severed by the belief that there literally is no future, society's focus violently snaps back to the present.
You start living strictly for the immediate moment.
Right. You have to.
And that creates this bizarre survivalist mentality. What's fascinating to me is you saw people taking completely opposite approaches to the exact same dread.
The bunkers versus the communes.
Yes. You had people digging high-tech bomb shelters, packing them with, the latest gadgets and canned goods.
Preparing for the apocalypse with technology.
Right. And then you had people fleeing to rural communes in North Carolina, trying to escape technology entirely, just hoping they could sort of outlive its collapse.
But psychologically, the high-tech bunker and the low-tech commune are the exact same response.
Wait, really? How so?
They represent complete despair over the idea of actually changing society. The political will to fix the collective ship is gone, so the only rational choice left is individual survival.
Oh, wow. It's exactly like that sinking ship analogy.
Yeah.
Except now they aren't just ignoring the leak, they're arguing over whose cabin has the best lighting for their final moments.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Woody Allen actually captured this mood perfectly in his 1973 movie Sleeper. His character essentially concludes that political solutions are a total failure.
Right, leaving him to believe in only two things.
Sex and death.
Exactly. That is the waning of historical time in a nutshell. When existence gets reduced to just sex and death, you're not building a legacy.
Well, you're just trying to experience as much sensory input as possible before the clock runs out.
Right, and because of that despair, you see this massive inward collapse of energy between the 1960s and the 1970s.
The radical, outwardly focused political movements of the 60s literally morphed into a 1970s obsession with mental health and personal wellness.
Yes, the triumph of the therapeutic over politics.
And I want to pause here for a second, just to be clear for you listening. The source text looks at figures across the political spectrum, particularly the 60s New Left too. But it's not doing that to endorse or condemn their politics.
Right. We aren't taking a political stance here either.
Exactly. We're just using them as a magnifying glass for this broader cultural shift. Like, for instance, take Jerry Rubin.
Oh, Rubin is a prime example of this trajectory. He was a prominent radical, a leader of the Yippies in the 1960s. Very vocal, very political.
But by the 70s, his entire focus shifts. He totally abandons collective action and goes on this relentless quest for self-discovery.
He basically consumes a smorgasbord of therapies.
And the list is exhaustive. I mean, he's doing those intense confrontational self-help seminars from the 70s,
He takes up bioenergetics, too.
which literally involve trying to release trauma by screaming or hitting pillows, right?
Yeah, very physical, very inward focused.
Yeah.
He's also doing gestalt therapy, jogging, adopting strict health food diets, trying acupuncture.
He just goes on this massive internal journey. And his ultimate conclusion is that he just needs to love himself enough so he doesn't need anyone else,
And that it's actually fine to enjoy making a lot of money.
which is quite the pivot from a 60s radical.
It perfectly illustrates how the demand for radical social change gets neutralized. It gets transmuted into a quest for personal health.
So the climate became therapeutic rather than religious or political?
Exactly. People started seeking the illusion of personal well-being instead of salvation or social justice. It suggests that radical politics, for many like Rubin, had arguably been a form of therapy all along.
Like a way to find meaning in an otherwise empty life?
Precisely.
You see the exact same thing with Susan Stern in the radical group The Weathermen. She describes her time in the movement not in terms of deep ideological conviction, but in purely therapeutic terms.
She wanted to feel strong and solid, I believe was the quote.
Yes, she wanted to absorb the glow of being near charismatic media star leaders like Bernadine Dorn. She literally says she was trying to find her niche in life.
Which completely reframes political action. It's no longer about the cause, it's about how the cause makes the individual feel.
But let me push back on this for a second, because, I mean, isn't giving yourself permission to be healthy fundamentally a good thing?
Well, sure.
So why is the author so critical of people trying to process their own traumas, like Rubin or Stern?
It's a really critical distinction. The critique isn't against health or genuine healing. What is being critiqued is the triumph of the therapeutic mindset itself.
Okay, unpack that for me.
This mindset redefines core human concepts like love, duty, and meaning merely as the fulfillment of the patient's own emotional requirements. So any form of self-sacrifice or submitting to a higher loyalty outside of yourself, like a community or a cause, starts to be viewed as oppressive.
I see. So instead of fighting a corrupt system or working through the friction of a difficult relationship, you just learn to process your feelings about it while jogging and eating health food.
Exactly. It trivializes actual political and social conflicts by turning everything into a personal, internal problem to be solved by a therapist.
And it completely strips away the capacity for collective action.
Right. And because this therapeutic mindset strips away your ability to find meaning in a collective cause, you're left entirely alone with yourself.
And when you're alone with yourself, you desperately need someone else to tell you that you exist, which plays out immediately in the art and literature of the time.
Suddenly, literature became incredibly confessional.
Yeah, we see the rise of writers like Norman Mailer, Erica Jong, and Donald Barthelme adopting this deeply personal style.
But the argument Lasch makes is that these aren't actual confessions, they are anti-confessions.
Yeah. Right, because a true confession requires vulnerability. In a true confession, the writer is bearing their soul to arrive at some deeper, universal truth.
Or to seek genuine forgiveness. But in the anti-confession, the writer is doing the exact opposite.
They use self-deprecating humor and pseudo-revelations to charm the audience.
Yes, and to preemptively deflect criticism. They offer the illusion of intimacy to avoid taking real responsibility for their actions.
Woody Allen is a prime example here again. He wrote this hilarious parody of Van Gogh's letters to his brother, but, well, instead of the tortured artist wrestling with his soul, he writes him as a dentist.
A dentist deeply worried about oral prophylaxis and root canal work.
Yes, it's very clever, but it's pure deflection. It uses humor so the reader and the writer doesn't have to look at anything real.
And that deflection covers up a terrifying inner emptiness. When you look at Frederick Exley's memoir, you see this laid bare.
Yeah, he writes about his intense obsession with the famous football player Frank Gifford and the literary critic Edmund Wilson.
Exley literally describes himself as a yawning void. He is terrified of living and dying in bleak anonymity.
He writes that he wants to stick his dirty fingers into posterity. He doesn't just want to be known. He wants to force the world to acknowledge he existed.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They aren't writing about themselves to understand themselves.
They're doing it purely to ensure an audience is watching them.
That is the core of it. And it's why this analysis completely dismisses other progressive critics of the time, like Edwin Scher or Richard Sennett.
Because they argued that this retreat into privatism was just a symptom of upper-class complacency.
Right, exactly. And that view completely misses the reality of the situation. This isn't a relaxed, wealthy retreat into a private garden.
People are retreating into themselves out of sheer desperation because the public world resembles a war zone.
They aren't complacent. They are terrified.
Which means we have to stop looking at this as just a quirky cultural trend of the 70s. We have to look at the actual clinical psychology driving it.
Right, we are shifting from cultural symptoms to the hard psychiatric definition of pathological narcissism.
And here, we really have to correct a very common misconception. The psychoanalyst Eric Fromm made the mistake of treating narcissism as just a metaphor for selfishness.
Or a lack of brotherly love.
Right, because we tend to use narcissists today to just mean someone who takes too many selfies or is overly vain.
But clinical narcissism is far more complex and far more destructive than just being a little too into yourself.
Exactly. Psychiatrists at the time were noticing a massive shift. The waiting rooms weren't filled with Freud's classic neurotics anymore.
Right, a Freudian neurotic generally functioned well, but had a specific, isolated conflict.
Like a hand-washing compulsion or a hysterical paralysis.
Yes, driven by a clash between their impulses and their morals. But psychiatrists started seeing a flood of character disorders.
These new patients didn't have strong morals clashing with impulses. They were haunted by a vague, diffuse emptiness and completely chaotic behavior that infected their entire personality.
To understand why this happens, you have to look at the psychoanalytic theory of Melanie Klein. She studied how secondary narcissism arises in childhood.
And this is where the mechanism gets incredibly dark.
Yeah.
It happens when a child experiences intense, aggressive rage and internalizes terrifying, bad images of their parents.
The child's mind processes these internal images as literal monsters or vampires.
Wow. So to survive that intense internal terror, the child's psyche basically has to defend itself.
Exactly. So they create a grandiose self. They build an internal fantasy of omnipotence, wealth, and beauty to shield themselves from the anxiety and the rage.
But because the child had to build this massive fortress of grandiosity to survive, the adult is left fundamentally disconnected from others.
The adult reality of the narcissist is incredibly bleak. They can be highly promiscuous, sure, but they can't actually experience joyful, connective intimacy.
Because playful sex requires dropping your guard, which they cannot do. They view vulnerability as a threat to that fortress.
Furthermore, they're absolutely dependent on other people for admiration to prop up that grandiose self. But secretly, and this is key, they hold those same people in contempt for providing it.
Like, if you admire them, you must be a fool.
Exactly. They are terrified of dependence. And even if they go to therapy, they just use their intellectual insight to evade any true meaning.
They learn the vocabulary of therapy to sound insightful while changing absolutely nothing about their behavior. They weaponize the therapy.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this clinical profile perfectly explains the modern absolute terror of aging.
Oh, absolutely. Because a psychologically healthy person builds an internal store of loving memories over their life.
They have an identity tied to historical continuity. They are part of a family, a community, a tradition.
So as they age and their physical capacities decline, they draw immense comfort from that internal warmth.
But the narcissist lacks all of that.
They have zero internal warmth to draw from.
None. So they rely entirely on external validation to prove they exist. They rely on youth, beauty, celebrity, charm, and sexual magnetism.
And all of those things inevitably fade. Time comes for everyone.
When that external validation dries up, the narcissist is left with nothing but that terrifying inner void we talked about earlier.
Aging isn't just a loss of vitality for them. It is psychological annihilation.
It really is.
So, if this is a deeply destructive psychological pathology, you would think society would actively try to cure it, or at least marginalize it, right?
You would think so, but the reality is the exact opposite.
Modern society, and specifically the modern corporate bureaucracy, systematically selects for and rewards these exact narcissistic traits.
We see this clearly in Michael McColby's study of corporate executives. It tracks the transition from the loyal organization man of the 1950s to the modern executive gamesman of the 1970s.
The organization man was loyal, built a career at one company, and valued stability.
But as corporate bureaucracies became more complex, more about managing people and perceptions than just making physical products, the structure evolved to weed those people out.
Because loyalty became a liability. Enter the gamesman.
The gamesman doesn't actually want to build things. He doesn't even necessarily care about the long-term health of the company he works for.
He just wants the exhilaration of running the team and the constant, immediate validation of being seen as a winner. His absolute deepest, darkest fear is being labeled a loser.
The gamesman is described as boyish, playful, and highly seductive, but entirely lacking in deep convictions. He will do business with anyone.
He will manipulate powerful customers against his own company just to maintain leverage and keep his options open.
To the gamesman, actual loyalty to a company or a team is a trap that will emasculate him.
So what does this all mean? It's like playing a massive multiplayer video game, where your goal isn't to build a successful guild or actually complete the quest,
Your only goal is to make sure everyone else loses.
all while ensuring the spectators think you look incredibly cool doing it. You surround yourself with what is described as an exciting, sexy atmosphere at the office.
Where everyone is flattering you and you're keeping everyone off balance.
But there is a profound tragedy built into the life of the gamesman.
Because he relies entirely on this flirtatious, high-stakes atmosphere for his psychic survival, he is living on borrowed time.
Right. As the gamesman ages, he inevitably hits a professional plateau where he can no longer advance.
And because he spent his entire career manipulating people instead of building real trust or deep connections, he has no safety net. He just played the game.
And when the game moves on to younger, more energetic, more ruthless players, the aging gamesman loses the ability to command the attention he desperately needs to survive psychologically.
He is left entirely alone with his inner emptiness, completely unable to cope with the loss of the spotlight.
Okay, let's briefly recap this journey we've been on. We started by looking at how the fear of a doomed future, that pervasive sense that the world is ending, pushed society away from collective political action and into a therapeutic retreat.
We saw how that retreat created a culture obsessed with empty, self-serving confessions.
We unpacked the harsh clinical reality of narcissism, how it's a defense mechanism against childhood terror and inner emptiness, not just simple vanity.
And finally, we looked at how our modern corporate structures actively reward this ruthless, empty gamesmanship.
So, as you go about your day, we want you to think about your own media consumption. Think about your own career goals and the leaders you admire. Are you seeking genuine connection and a sense of historical continuity? Or are you just chasing a therapeutic hit of validation to keep the void at bay?
This raises an important question, one that extends far beyond the individual and right to the core of our institutions. If our culture continues to elevate and reward the gamesmen leaders who fear intimacy, lack conviction, and rely purely on the shallow admiration of their peers, what happens to the fabric of a society when an entire generation of these winners finally ages out of their charm?
A society run by people whose life vests have lost all their bedaddle, but who still refuse to help steer the ship. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material today. We'll catch you on the next one.